Hi, everyone. Claire here, founder of Ladies Get Paid. We can't achieve equal pay without equal opportunity. That's why today's conversation, yes, we talk about money, but we're also talking about a lot of other things. So I am really excited to welcome Valerie Williams. She is a diversity champion and community builder with over 15 years of experience advocating for fairness and equity in the workplace. She has her own company, Converge, but before she launched it, Valerie served as the global head of inclusion and diversity at Stripe and helped create the foundational diversity and belonging program at Airbnb. So the goal of the conversation today is to really figure out how can we as employees set ourselves up to get equal opportunity, but also maybe more importantly is how do these companies provide us with what Valerie has called pathways to power. So first, hi, Valerie. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Claire. It's so wonderful to be here and be a part of this event.
Yeah. So pathways to power. I didn't make that up. I love a good alliteration. So I saw this was something that you said. What do you mean by it?
Well, I've really been focusing on this lately, particularly in the last year when we have seen so much of a surge in diversity, equity, and inclusion with an emphasis on racial equity. But just in general, such an interest in the space and a desire for change, both from employees and now finally from people that are in power at these workplaces. But I think where organizations fall short is really thinking about this concept of pathways to power. Because to really think about equity in an organization is to think about who has power in that organization, who has the seat at the table, who has the voice, and who is at the position to make decisions. And so these pathways to power is a way, as an umbrella term for us to start thinking about this all throughout the organization. That, of course, starts with the representation piece of who actually sits in leadership roles in the C-suite and the board. That also thinks about who is in the pipeline to get to those roles and who's getting prepared to get to those roles, right? And then it cascades all the way out throughout the entire employee experience. Obviously, a lot of emphasis on equity is around pay equity. So we focus in there as well. But, holistically, it's about, again, who has power in the organization, who is benefiting financially from the organization being in existence, and then who has access to even get into these organizations. And that's how we really build out a strategy around that piece.
Pipeline problem. A lot of P is happening. Pathways to power, pipeline problem. I already know what you're going to say here, but when people say, I don't know where the people of color are, where can I find them? What do you think about that?
I started doing this work around diversity and inclusion in 2014. And literally still to this day, the number one question is like, I don't know where to find these people. And that just blows my mind. It blows my mind, whether it's trying to find a woman developer for a tech company or, to your point, people of color throughout these industries. And from my perspective, there is an opportunity to do pipeline building. But there are people that are available that people are just missing. And so I think there is still a separation between sort of access to these organizations and different communities. A lot of people, again, in this racial equity moment, start with HBCUs, right? But everyone is now thinking about HBCUs, but they're really thinking about like 5 of them, but there's hundreds, right, in the United States. But beyond that, how do we think about skill development? One of the things we did at Airbnb was looking at how to hire more marginalized people in data science. How about we look at data analysts and really give them the extra skills that it takes to get to data science. So not only like going back through K through 12 and building pipelines, but also looking at the work, the people that are already in the market and figuring out those pathways to power.
Okay. So I know that this starts by recruiting, right? Thinking more, expanding your mind to what a culture fit and a great candidate looks like, but it's also expanding your mind to what a leader is.
That's right.
Where do you find that the first breakdown happens on that pathway to power, right? Once somebody's in the door, where do you get stuck? Where does that kind of person get stuck? And then what can the organization do better?
Such a great question. I often talk about marginalized people and people that are traditionally underrepresented, the distrust, the seeds of distrust start at that point of hire. So what expectations are you setting about the environment that this person is about to enter, about their role, about some of the challenges of the organizations as it relates to D&I efforts, right? Like, I think there's a better way to prepare marginalized people to enter these workplaces. And so I think the first piece that organizations can look at about how are you having honest conversations at the beginning of that employee joining your organization. And then I think one of the lessons that I learned, and particularly with Stripe, is that it was a pretty white organization, and we had to be intentional about networking people into the organization. So it was not only, sort of a majority population, it was a tight-knit community that had power. And so as we're bringing new leaders in, how are we intentionally networking into these networks that have been in existence for 3, 4, 5 years, right? So those are some of the areas that at the early set, at the hire, and how we set them up for success during onboarding, where companies can really focus.
So to get folks into the pipeline, into the forward momentum, right? You need to have people who amplify your work. You need to have advocates. Do you have an example of a way that a company can do that, right? You have to do it intentionally, but like, what is the thing that they can do? Maybe even on Monday.
Such a good question. I think really the one thing that I really recommend to a lot of organizations is this pre-exit interview. So at a 2-year mark or 3-year mark or 4-year mark, really looking at your, the people that are in your organization that are loyal, that are hardworking, that you would love to retain, have a pre-exit interview with them to say, what would get you to leave? Because you're trying to get ahead of losing them. And you're trying to think about retention is a lagging indicator. And so you're trying to get ahead of it by really addressing their core needs, but switching it a little bit to ask them what would make them leave. They might have, I know a lot of people of color moved around in organizations because there was so much opportunity this last year, but the organizations that really were dedicated to the people that have been loyal to them, that have, had strong performance and that are dedicated, really talking to them and understanding what their specific challenges are so that you can address those before they leave. That's one tangible thing I think organizations can do right now.
That I've never thought of that before. And it's sort of like, don't wait until there's a problem to try to fix it.
Hello.
Too late.
It's way too late. It's way too late. If they've already taken the LinkedIn message or the call, you're kind of late.
Yeah. Myth of the meritocracy. You mentioned that before.
Yeah.
God, we're doing alliterations all day. Okay, myth of the meritocracy. What is that? And then how do we dispel that myth?
We like iterations. I'm gonna let you in on a secret. We like these things because it's memorable. You'll remember this, right? You'll remember these little phrases. That's why we like these alliterations. It's a little pastory, but we'll go with it. Okay. So the myth of meritocracy is that there's so much societal inequities that bleeds into the workplace. But we often hear when we're trying to go after communities that have been traditionally underrepresented in various environments, that we don't want to lower the bar. We don't want to lower the bar to entry to get into our organizations. That's making the assumption that merit is the reason that people that are already in the organization is there in the first place, which we know that that's really not the case. When you look at referral systems, you look at networks, people that come into organizations are extensions of people that are already there. And so if you already have a very homogenous organization, you're going to continue to build that until you intentionally do something different. And that has nothing to do with whether someone's qualified or not. It has a lot to do with access. And access has less to do with the person that is going to be interviewed and a lot to do with the system. And so that's what the myth of meritocracy is that people often feel like, I got here on my own merit without really understanding that, that is one element, but there's a lot of privilege that's out there as well, which we know is unearned benefits that you get just being a member of a certain group. And so that's what when we start to break down that myth, it helps people not to be so tied to someone has to have gone to Stanford and been at this top tech company. So that's we're going to limit our profile to look for that talent. When really, is that going to be what carries the work forward? Is that going to be what really makes them successful at that job? Probably not. So let's think creatively about talent, and let's get honest about what it actually takes to get these jobs done. And then we can go look for talent at that point.
There's this thing called glamour work, glam work. I remember discovering that when I was doing research for my book. And it's this work that gets you noticed, right? It's work that FaceTime with clients or puts you in rooms with folks of influence. Oftentimes men get those opportunities. And it's not done on purpose necessarily, right? Like as a manager, maybe you don't realize that you're giving those kinds of opportunities to the men, right? And then people of color and women, we're doing more of the like behind the scenes grunt work, support work, right? But then it gets harder, A, to be noticed, but B, I think it then becomes harder to make the case for how you've maybe impacted the bottom line, right? And that's the key when you're negotiating your salary. So as a manager, how do you make sure that you're giving those glam opportunities? And then as somebody who, is working on a team, maybe more junior, middle manager, how do you raise your hand for moments, opportunities of influence?
Yes. Again, back to pathways of power. Pathways of power start with having those sexy projects, getting in on those calls that will, to your point, really move you forward and get you in the right positions. When we've advised organizations on how to do this, how to tactically think about this, first, you need to have a very objective process of how you decide who gets to lead a certain initiative or project. Oftentimes, people just get tapped. They get tapped on the shoulder and then they get the job. So we really try to, even for internal mobility roles, really try to have an objective process of how we select people to get a project or an initiative. And with that selection process, have some sort of diversity in mind. So one way to do that is to, at the project level, and then at the time of promotions and calibration conversations, looking at by demographic, who is getting promotions over time. And if you're seeing that, you have a certain percentage of people women in your organization, but that's not mapping the percentage of people getting promoted, then we know that we have a gap. And we know that we need to think about critically why aren't women getting promoted as fast, right? And so I think tangibly start tracking promotions by demographic, and then tangibly get an objective internal process in place when a growth opportunity comes up of how you select that person to be able to lead that initiative.
Great. Really great. And I know we don't have that much more time with you, so we'll have to do another webinar with you.
We'll do another call.
Yeah. Let's talk about the double bind for a second. So for those of you watching who are not quite sure what that means, you've probably experienced it. And I hate that I'm going to tell you this, but when we act outside of the social norm of how we're expected to act, right? Women, people of color, you want to be accommodating, you want to be nice. But hold on, if you act outside of that, you might get penalized. Meaning if you're assertive, you could be perceived as aggressive. So, and by the way, women penalize other women just as much as men do. Right. So if you are somebody who says, I want to be a leader, you want to show your ambition, right? Because this is what I tell everybody in our community to do. Be clear about where you want to go. Is there a backlash that can happen to that? Like, how do you thread the needle, walk the line, right? Of asserting yourself, but then also recognizing, you have a boss. You don't want them to feel threatened by you. I mean, this is horrible. This is calculus that we have to do on a daily basis, and it's exhausting.
Daily.
Tell me daily. Yeah. Tell me, what do we do? What do we do as employees? And then how do we make it easier for our employees if we're folks who are in management?
Listen, the faster you can get a career ladder, career level, any kind of structure in place that articulates why people are at the level they are and how to get to the next level, that has to be articulated and it has to be revisited throughout. I know companies have this in place. It's often not even talked about until that annual performance review, and it's too late. And so if you're an organization, you have to get some kind of structure in place where you're setting clear expectations of how to get to the next level. And when you're hiring, you're articulating where someone is, why they're at that level, and again, how to get to this next level. For the employee, you have to hold your company accountable to that, but you also have to, what you're saying is like, play the dance. People like me are trying to make these workplaces more inclusive, more accessible for everyone, but it's going to take a while. And so you still have to get in the game and you have to understand what success looks like at your organization and overlay that with like your personal values. Like how much do they align? How much do you want to like push yourself and maybe challenge yourself to meet those organization standards is an individual decision, right? We often talk about people want to be able to bring their full selves to work, authentic selves to work. That is what we're trying to do. But sometimes I'm not going to bring my whole self to work because that may work against me. And I know that's controversial, but I may read an organization and understand this may not be a safe place for me to be my whole self, but I will be authentic. I will learn how to be effective in this organization and I will be action oriented. And so I think you have to thread that line.
Yeah, I think that's great. Really, really good. And just sort of to wrap it up, how do we make sure that we're entering into companies that have pathways to power, you know, that provide equal opportunity, that pay us equally? So what are questions? Well, first, can we figure this stuff out before we even interview? And second, what do we ask during the interview process? I have a third question, but I'm going to ask you after you answer this one.
Got it. For sure, ask some of these questions in the interview, but before I answer that question directly, try to get to have conversations with people that are experiencing day-to-day, real-time employees that have been there. So companies may back channel you, back channel the company, back channel and try to get someone in-house to give you a real life example and experience. In the interview, I think you can ask about, obviously research what people are doing. There's a lot of public announcements about a lot of work lately. So I would bring in that information and then ask in the interview, you know, it's been 6 months, it's been 9 months, you made this commitment. Now, you know, how have you caused shifts? What has changed in your organization? Really hold them accountable in that interview. I think that's totally appropriate. If you can't have any data, there's nothing out there, I would just ask them about what is their philosophy on diversity? What is your point of view? Where are you focusing your effort as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And that will tell you enough. The answer will tell you enough. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess. And then last question now is, when you work for a company and you do want to see change and you want to hold them accountable, how do you do this in a way that's not going to make you look like the agitator? That is a question that the Ladies Get Paid community asks a lot.
That's right. Curious.
I know it depends on who you are, where you work, your relationship, but have you gotten that question before? And if so, what would you say?
Always. You're going to use a lot of social capital to try to advocate internally for these things. And so what you want to do is pick a battle. Okay, like pick a battle. And I would say, so be specific about what you're asking to do, and be direct about where you want to try to create some change. It's hard to do organizational change. So pick your battles, start small. And always make sure your work is done, right? Like you don't ever want your advocacy to get in the way of you actually performing your day-to-day job. So still kill it at your job. And then, you know, afterwards, really get focused on that advocacy piece. But that's why we do strategy work. So we want to hold people accountable. We want to set accountability structures so that employees can just like point to a plan and ask about that accountability. So that's what.
How do we find you, follow you, Valerie, for everybody watching? I mean, we're going to have notes in the comments here, links, all that good stuff, but tell us next steps. And also if you have any resources, take us out with words of wisdom.
Yes. So for more information about Converge, my firm, you can go to convergefirm.com for more information about our services. I would just say, you know, hang in there. The workplaces are changing. Again, I've been doing this work for a little bit now, and I've seen small change. So I want to leave with hope and optimism. And from my vantage point, the change is slow, but it's happening. So that's my final word.
I'm so glad that we ended on a positive note. And we're wrapping up the day with you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all for watching. Yes. Super excited to hold ourselves accountable. We're going to hold our companies accountable. And also for all of you who are in positions of power and influence, we're counting on you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Now hold on.